Hi guys, so this is a new series. As you could see, we are in a different setting. This is not going to be in all the future episodes, just for this first episode. Okay, so this is a new series wherein I share with you a few thoughts about the books that I have just recently finished reading. And for today, we are going to talk about the first book I read in 2021, the first week of January, is of course A Promised Land by former President Barack Obama. Okay, so this is a two-part memoir of Barack Obama. This is the first part. This is about 720-ish pages, and I believe the second book would be roughly the same, or the second part would be roughly the same. Published, just last year. It's very fresh. I'm sure you've heard of this book, and right off the bat, it is an absolute must-read. Of course, I had high expectations for this book because we know Barack Obama to be very eloquent and to be very articulate in his speeches and in everything that we see him in the news and all that. So I had very high expectations of this, and it absolutely delivered. So I really really enjoyed it. But because I don't want to I want to make sure that I get this right. I have my notes here. So what can you expect of this first part memoir? So in this book, he talks about his journey to the White House. So it kind of starts off, before he became president, and his journey, his experiences, his ideals into becoming president, how he got there, and how he got there, how he became president, what the campaign looks like, how they started it, and who were the key team members in his team who helped him get through there. And of course, all throughout the stories would be little snippets of how his beautiful, gorgeous, and smart wife, Michelle Obama, cope with the whole thing as well, right? So very few lang naman, but it is there every now and then. So he also talked about the financial crisis and the Recovery Act, which is one of his first acts as president, because when he came into the role of president of of the president of the United States of America is actually right after, I think, the financial crisis in 2008. So upon becoming the president, that was his primary number one big problem, right? The financial crisis, which I'm sure all of us would remember and in some way may have affected you as well. He also talked about the healthcare bill, one of his missions, and one of the things that he was most passionate about into passing the healthcare bill. He talked about the counter-terrorism in Afghanistan and Al Qaeda. More about that later. He talked about the Iran nuclear weapons development or uranium refinery. Again, more about that later. He talked about the climate change and clean energy bill or project as well, and also the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which is related to the financial crisis. He mentioned also I think a few pages or a few chapters on Deepwater Horizon catastrophe. And then, if you're not familiar with the Deepwater Horizon, actually, there's a movie, if I'm not mistaken. There's a movie about the Deepwater Horizon incident. So, Deepwater is an oil rig, a private oil rig. Nainitan na ako. So, if you're not familiar, Deepwater is an oil rig, it's a US oil rig, I believe, if not mistaken. It's private company, and something happened and it exploded, and there were oil spills everywhere, which of course affected the flora and fauna in the local ecosystem of the ocean in that area. And that was a catastrophe. There's no other way to describe it, because it is literally killing biodiversity, bioecosystem every single day, every single minute. Therefore, they are in a race against time into a solution. How are we going to fix this? What are we going to do next? And on top of that, on top of the literal act of fixing the problem, a lot of politics goes behind the scenes as well as to what should be the policies around this anyway. What is the laws that can be what are the laws that can be applied? What do we have? Do we have environment protection laws and so on and so forth? So there's a lot of that in play as well. He also shared about the bankruptcy and the financial crisis of Greece. I'm actually quite surprised about that information because I didn't know about it and I didn't think that it would be such a significant thing for the world economy, for the world financial um, institution, but it is. I guess in that sense, that's when I realized that, all this, the financial world is Wall Street and so on, is connected globally. It truly is. That's why it could create this domino effect on everyone, even a relatively small nation like Greece, right? Compared to giants like USA and Russia and or China or France or Germany. But then a financial crisis in Greece impacts all of the big nations everywhere still. He also shared about the midterm elections. And he also, interestingly, for me, one of the topics that was interesting for me personally was his removal of the don't ask, don't tell policy. The intent of that, also the don't ask, don't tell policy, if I can if I can call it, is basically a policy in the saan ba yun? Sa military ba yun, Han? I think it's in the military wherein I believe the intent was that that you're not required to divulge your gender and that you're not supposed to ask about another person's gender as well. I believe maybe the intent was to protect the privacy of the LGBTQ community or individuals within the service, but it had the opposite effect. It actually became, because of the don't ask, don't tell, it actually became a you know, sort of oppression because you can't say, you can't, parang it became something of an obstacle, of a hindrance. Parang it became a secret almost because you're not supposed to tell. In the same manner, nobody's supposed to ask. So parang because of all this, let's not talk about it environment, that actually propagated the environment of oppression and difficulty of expressing yourself. So he talked about that in his book, the removal of that policy. And he also talked about the Dream Act. And then another interesting topic was that he talked about the attempted peace talks between Israel and Palestine, which failed. He talked about the Arab Spring, and finally, he closed the first part of his memoir with Operation Neptune Spear, which is the capture of Osama bin Laden. So it's a lot, and I'm in no position to talk about each and every one of these topics myself, but suffice to say, I have learned a lot, and for me, it is an absolute must-read because it is from the perspective of the President of the United States, who for all intents and purposes, the leader of the biggest, most powerful nation now in the planet. So, it's very interesting to me, and it's an eye-opening book, and I love how he wrote it. He wrote it in such a candid way, in such a understandable, no nonsense way. Like, he will almost in a layman's term. It's not textbook like. It's really a first person memoir, just a conversation like format. So that's easier for you to read it and to appreciate it and to understand really the politics of US is, and kind of gives you a better appreciation of what goes on and what goes on in U.S. politics and how their policies and their thinking affects you in your little in your little country, little portion of the world, because it does, and that's one of my key major Mali. What I realized is that I mean, I knew, all of us know, right? We all know that to be the president of the United States of America is like the number one biggest, most powerful position anybody will have or can have, right? So we know that being the president of the United States is the most powerful role in the world right now. But one of my key takeaways after reading this book is truly understanding what that means. Because I thought I knew, right? I mean, you see it in the movies, you see it in the news, and you see it in SNL and everywhere else. But it's only after reading this book, Obama's memoir, where it truly struck me that indeed the United States policies and opinions and money and might and power really affects all the other nations on earth. And that might sound an exaggeration, but I really do believe that. I think, it is the most powerful position in the world. And the policies they make, the opinions they have and they share, the decisions they could make or break any nation, could really affect the economy and maybe not the culture directly, but the economy of certain nations, right? And they do create that domino effect. The Obama mentions a few other superpowers like Germany and France and Russia and China in the book, but it's really maybe there's a biased view in here, of course, this being a memoir, but after reading this, it really sounds like those powerful nations that he mentioned could create a domino effect if one of them kind of have a different opinion or a different take on certain matters, or if they don't agree on certain policies or in certain decisions that need to be made. And at the center of it, the U.S. opinion and the U.S. decision really has weight. It is the heaviest probably opinion of them all. And I'm not saying that I don't say that in any disrespect in any way to any other nation, but I'm just saying that because after having read the book, that's how it made me feel. Like it is where I truly understood what it means to say, when you say that this is the most powerful position on earth. And that's when I understood that meaning. Okay, so that's just what I wanted to share. And again, it is a lot. This book is a lot. It has a lot of topics. It has a lot of opinions. Some of the subjects here may not be of interest to you, maybe not. Some may be more interesting than the others. That certainly happened for me. So, for example, I was particularly interested in the Dream Act and also in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That was really curious for me. And, well, actually, all of them are quite interesting for me. Just going back very briefly about Afghanistan, counter-terrorism, Al Qaeda, Iran's nuclear weapons development, and so on. That to me, before reading this book, I have read Mossad, which I've shared also with you before. I have read I Was Told to Come Alone. I have read Prisoners of Geography, which essentially all has the same stories about Afghanistan and Al Qaeda and counterterrorism and so on and so forth. So having read all of those before I read the memoir of Obama from his perspective, that gave me a better understanding. That kind of closed the loop for me. I'm not saying you should I'm not saying you should have a pre-read before this. I'm just saying that it gives you certainly a better appreciation for all the books, not just the memoir, but for all the books, because you kind of see it from different perspectives, and that gives you a better understanding, a wider view of things, and that really helped. And it's also quite comforting to know that there are consistencies in the storytelling. So hindi naman nag-iiba-iba, they're consistent. It's just different perspectives, but consistent in the storytelling, consistent in the facts, which is of course very important. Also, Arab Spring. Yeah, he mentioned Arab Spring also. I would definitely recommend you to read this. It is not an easy read. only because it is so thick and it has 700 plus pages. But with the format of the way it's written, it is an easy read. It's very conversational, it's very candid, it's very personal and intimate. So that makes it easier to read. It's not like a textbook academic read, diba? So mas madali siyang basahin. But again, it's it's quite long. But I promise you, it is worth it. If you're into world affairs, U.S. politics, if you're curious about U.S. politics, and how, especially the financial crisis part, how that kind of affects you, and how world leaders' decisions may affect your nation somehow. This may be for you if you're curious about that. If you're curious about how world leaders live, this could be for you as well. Although I have to say, there are fewer moments of that here. Obama talks more about the topics that I mentioned and how the U.S. kind of tackled those problems. And his personal view, he does share his personal views, which for me, was one of the more enjoyable parts of the book, especially his journey into becoming a president. You know, he shared about his transition from being a senator and then to becoming president, how life was so different, how Michelle, his wife, and their kids cope with it, and so on and so forth. He also shared about the difficulties, the trade-off of being the first family. So I thought that was all very interesting. I am very curious about him personally as well, him being the first African American president of United States. So that for me is another reason for following him and reading about him. And I am just glad that it's really worth the read. It's really quite quite epic, so to speak. So I loved it. I enjoyed it. I am looking forward for the part 2 memoir. He did share I think in the introduction, he said that originally the plan was only to write one book, but in the course of his writing, he discovered that it just won't fit in one book and it will not give justice to all the events and all the people that he mentioned in the book. It will not give justice to just write it and cram it all in just one book. So the part 2, so there will be a part 2, which I don't know when will come out, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And one last thing, this is also available in an audiobook format. This being such a long read, you may want to consider the audiobook as well, which as a bonus is actually read by himself, by Barack Obama. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, this is 720 plus pages, and he's narrating to you. So that is quite interesting in his signature way of talking, and his speech and the cadence of his speech. So yeah, the price point wise, parang just a little difference lang naman, few dollars difference. So if you feel like this is too heavy for you, too much, no time to read this much, go try the audiobook. At least you could, be productive with something else while it's in the background and still get to enjoy the book. So there you have it. I definitely recommend this. Definitely not for everyone though, but if you are into US politics, if you are into world affairs, if you are into all of that, all of that stuff, then you will enjoy this. So there you go. I hope that is helpful somehow, and I hope you enjoy the book as much as I did. So, thank you. And wala na akong boses. Thanks guys.